Hey team, this is the Innovation Inc. podcast, and I'm your host, Liz Brown Evans. We sit down with our favorite entrepreneurs and nerd out on anything that involves innovation in the corporate space. So if you work for a corporate company, but you think like an entrepreneur, we're your people, and we're really excited you're here. Before we jump in, a huge thank you to our sponsor and Inc. 5000 company, Apex Software. They create powerful custom software, websites, and mobile apps that take your business's innovative ideas and turn them into realities. Reach out today to get a quote at apexsoftware.com. All right, everyone, let's get to it. Welcome back, guys. It is Liz Brown Evans of the Innovation Inc. podcast. I am thoroughly excited today for our guest. It's our second guest in our favorite industry. I apologize to all the other industries we've interviewed, but it's hard to compete with bourbon. So today we have the absolute pleasure of interviewing Jane from Maker's Mark, officially the Director of Innovation, but her more fun title, which we're really going to lean into today, is Master of Maturation, which I feel like is one of those things that you truly can't say 5 times fast. So Jane, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe a little bit of where you came from, how you ended up at Makers, and then we'll chat about innovation.
Yeah. Hey, Liz, good morning. Thanks for having me. My name's Jane Bowie, originally Jane Connor for any Lexington listeners. I am a Transy grad, born and raised in South Central Kentucky, Lake Cumberland area. And I have been in the bourbon industry almost 15 years. I started with Maker's Mark in early 2007 as the first international employee and spent my time trotting around the globe, introducing the world to bourbon, literally one drink at a time. And, 14 and a half years later, now run all the innovation, oversee all of our maturation processes here at the distillery in Loretto, Kentucky. I'm married to a crazy, wonderful guy and have a 4-year-old daughter who is very spirited, is probably the best. She has really strong leadership skills. And I live in Bardstown, Kentucky. So I love all things sports, all things travel, all things alcohol. So that's me.
I love it. Man, I think that's how my mom introduced me when I was little as well. So I appreciate your positive outlook on your daughter's personality. So I'm really excited to kind of dig in a little deeper into an actual distillery here in the state. I think obviously Maker's Mark is such a powerful brand and one that is so well known. So there's a million things we could talk about, but let's just start maybe with a broad overview of what does innovation look like at Makers? You've kind of mentioned you guys have a specific innovation philosophy. Why don't you unpack that for us a little bit?
Yeah. So, innovation honestly is still a 4-letter word to most people that work at the Maker's Mark distillery. You got to imagine we're located in a town of 400 or 500 people. The town pretty much is the distillery. And these are multi-generational employees that this is where they've lived and worked and grown up. And so we did one thing really well for over 50 years. And it's funny because we're a brand that when you look back at the 50s, it was a very innovative concept product for this industry. It was far more expensive than anything that was sitting on the market at the time. The family had kind of done things their own way, even though they were really grounded in the bourbon industry. They scrapped the old and started anew. So even though this brand was created in a very pioneering spirit, it stuck to one thing for so long. And so innovation's really only been a part of the brand's DNA and vocabulary for the last decade, probably, and really only the last 5 years. I think innovation is such a buzzword these days. So it is a very different philosophy. I think in our industry, there's a couple of ways to innovate. And there's probably more, but I think there's 2 real schools of thought. There's let's try stuff and see what happens, and maybe we'll come up with something, which I'm not allowed to do. Or there's let's define what winning looks like and let's build a roadmap to get to that point. And so actually my number 1 job description actually written down is I'm not allowed to throw shit against the wall. So, which is probably good for someone like me because I think there's a lot of experimenting you could do in our industry. But if you don't have a goal or a perceived outcome, you get mission creep very, very quickly. So we do a little bit of tinkering, and I think we don't always end up with the answer we expect going in. I think you have to have an open mind, but we usually, for each project, we define what winning looks like. We defined what losing could look like, right? There's also risk and reward with innovation. And I think just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And so for a brand that has so much heritage and such a passionate following from our consumer perspective, a lot of my job is equal parts pushing the envelope, but being the ultimate guardian of the brand as well. So it's really a balancing those two things when you look at a brand like Maker's Mark.
I love that you bring up your customers, because I imagine you guys have customers with very strong opinions, which is what you want, right? That means you have strong brand identity, you're close to the customer base. But I think in the bourbon industry, especially, what I'm absolutely fascinated by is that balance, because there's such a time lag between something you try now versus when it can hit the market. I guess the exception may be packaging. I don't know, but you can't package. Anyway, I really love that you even mentioned your customers, because, yeah, I imagine it's a bit of a give and take of listening to their feedback, but also not following every trend that they mention or want you to follow.
And that is exactly, you nailed it. And it's funny. I wish you could come work in our marketing department. No, I mean, it is. It's the balance of what are people asking for and what's on trend. But we're not an industry that plans in quarters or years. We plan in decades and centuries. So when you think about what we're making today is oftentimes not going to see the light of day for 10 years. You know, when you start a project, taking a pulse on what's happening right now isn't always as relevant, you know, for our industry as others. So it is a balancing act of, okay, what's trending? Where do we think this is going? But we also have to live with ourselves at the end of the day. Like, I still have to look myself in the mirror and say, hey, this was the right decision for the brand. And so there's a lot of talking to yourselves a little bit on purpose, right? Like that can be bad sometimes, but it also, you have to do things that truly make sense for this brand alone. Because if you're just doing what the distillery down the road's doing, or what is suddenly, really making a splash, by the time you're up and running in an industry like us, it might not even be relevant. And then you just look really late to the game and a little bit tone deaf. So honestly, I think it's taking in all the inputs and then saying what we got to do, what's right for us. And we actually, when we really started thinking about innovation, one of the smartest things Rob Samuels did, he's our third generation Samuel's in charge of makers. You know, he's an 8th generation bourbon maker here in Kentucky, and he inherited this brand from his dad. We're not family owned, but we're family operated, which is really wonderful. You kind of get the best of both worlds. But when we started talking about innovating in a more consistent and big way, the first thing he did is we sat down with a small team and we created guardrails. And I think people think about white space being that's such a buzzword right now. Like, let's go play in the white space. Okay, what does that mean? So I think too much, though, is sometimes crippling. Having guardrails and understanding intuitively and instinctively and being aligned as an organization on what's inbounds and what's out of bounds is one of the smartest things we ever did. It actually allows me to move faster and more creatively when I truly understand what makes sense. So we spent months establishing guardrails for the brand and how we would innovate, and things that were inbounds and things that were out of bounds. And it was so funny. The first year, he would make us actually read these out loud as we would sit down every meeting, until we all knew them by heart. But it was good work, and we revisit them, right? What made sense 10 years ago maybe doesn't make sense today, or there's natural evolution and innovation that, you know, something starts one way and you're going to naturally learn and evolve and change your mind. I love this industry. I constantly am learning things, and I change my mind a lot, and it's allowed, which is great. I mean, you only feel like an asshole sometimes, but it's, yeah, those guardrails and really establishing some rules, and I use that term loosely, around how we would innovate was it makes my job much, much easier, actually.
Sure. I've probably given this analogy on the podcast before. So sorry to our listeners if I have, but Mike Hilton, my partner here at Innovation Inc., he loves giving the analogy that if you take someone to the ocean and you say like, hey, go swim, it's a little bit overwhelming to look at the entire ocean and know like where to start or where you're going. And so rather thinking of innovation sort of like a pool, now, what you shouldn't do is like put in all the lanes and all the lines and tell, hey, you swim that direction, you swim this direction, and you need to do it at these times a day. But if you at least put people in a pool, it's sort of a confined area that you can like wrap your mind around rather than the Pacific. And I feel like that's what you're getting out of, you don't want to have too many like rules and regulations because then it stops being innovation and it's basically just project management. But you don't want to send someone with absolutely no guardrail. So I love the kind of guardrail term that you're putting to that. Along those lines, so you are basically, it sounds like building kind of this department, your job, your role. Why did you guys decide to start this department or put someone in your role?
I love the analogy, so I'm going to start using that. But we didn't. It was my side hustle forever. The thing about this company, Maker's Mark, is I laugh and tease Rob and Bill all the time. They still think we're 8 people in a loft most of the time. And we're a big brand, right? And I was here when we weren't that big of a brand. And it's been interesting to see how a brand like this goes through a little bit of an identity crisis as you start to grow and really like, okay, we're big. Do you act big? And it's like, no, you can still be you, but you need to probably start thinking a little bit bigger. So the truth is there was no conscious decision to start this department. Innovation was my side hustle for years. And it was myself and really Rob, kind of brainstorming. And he would say, do you want to go run with this? And I'd say, yeah, I'm going to go run with this. And then finally I realized I had a full-time job working at Maker's Mark and this was the side thing. And there came a day where it was just, this can't be a side thing anymore. There's too much. It's too important and it's too big. And so there wasn't a decision to start the department. It was more just, we have to, if we're going to continue on. And so we set up the department about 18 months ago. We have a teeny tiny building. We're hoping to get into actual space. I mean, I'm surrounded by about 2,000 bottles of whiskey, and this is not even the, tip of the iceberg.
That sounds so hard. That sounds like such a depressing work environment.
It really is. No, I have the greatest job in the world, for sure. But I brought in someone, I don't have a science background. I wish I did. Every day I wake up and I feel like it's that nightmare where you're at your AP chemistry test, but you didn't know you signed up for AP chemistry. That's what every day feels like for me for the most part, which is really fun because I learn a lot as far as, it really is a ton of chemistry. So I have a colleague, a gal that works for me who came from quality control, and she has a bio and chemistry background. She's highly technical. She's trained on all the lab equipment. So we're kind of a yin and yang. So the two of us make up the department. I also work with people on the marketing side, the commercial side, who are doing the packaging and working with agencies on creative and the storytelling and how we're going to do that. And then we have, it's very cross-functional. You work with the distillery team. You work with the warehouse team. Obviously, I work with Denny Potter, our master distiller, very closely. So we touch a lot of different parts of the business. And it's fun to sit in a room and dream something up, make the actual whiskey, watch it go on a bottle, and then also get to work on how it goes to market and how people are engaging with it. So yeah, it's been all out. I'm still adjusting to this being the full-time job. It's such a different world than where I came from. So
I love that. Good. I just think it's so cool that you get to touch so many pieces of what you guys do. As someone who's like marginally aware of like what it takes to make bourbon, in our prep call, I took furious notes. I'm going to list the things you mentioned because I just thought it was so cool that you like the full circle of you deal with the grains growing on the property, liquid from a taste or flavor standpoint, pressure testing, blending the liquid formation, like everything. You guys have to touch everything. And I think what I like about that is your view of innovation is not just about like some cool or sexy marketing ploy. It's everything of the process of bourbon. And you guys, it sounds like it's just in the DNA of how you guys understand growth and creativity.
I'm lucky how holistic it is. And that's, most brands probably aren't like that. In fact, I know they're not because, we have sister distilleries that work very differently. We're very lucky here because it is a very holistic vision. And I think a lot of that's still being family operated. And then I started my career in sales and marketing. So coming from that side and then also working in operations, it's fun getting to see it come full circle. So I feel lucky. And I work with really smart people every day that are really experts. I feel like I have a lot of breadth. And I mean, I definitely dive in the whiskey, like the blending and the liquid itself is probably my strongest passion and my best expertise. But I'm lucky I get to hear the marketer side, and then I get to hear, the people who are going to go bottle this this guy's insane. Like he doesn't, they don't understand what it takes to put a strip stamp on 100,000 bottles. Like, you're constantly like the in between going, okay, I see both points of view. So how do we there's a lot of compromising when it comes to what a marketer dreams up in a room versus the reality of how you can bring that product to life. And then even how a salesperson can actually sell it. So it's fun. It's fun seeing like all the different perspectives and where things net out. So
absolutely. One other thing to kind of maybe close out on this general topic that you said to us before as we were chatting was that all your innovation is meant to reinforce the brand, not find the next maker's mark. And I think what's interesting about that is we talk with so many companies about the difference between incremental improvement and breakout ideas. So you can incrementally improve something forever. That's what Toyota is like famous for. But breakout ideas are kind of typically like a new line of business or a new way of doing something. And I feel like you guys are almost redefining what breakout means, because what you're not doing, it sounds like you're not just doing incremental improvement, but but you're not trying to go make a new like seltzer water made with bourbon or something, So how do you guys define? Maybe if you have anything else to say, I feel like maybe not. But is there anything else that you guys use as kind of your North Star for like what is the goal of innovation?
I think for us, Makers is the bread and butter. I mean, it's our flagship. It's and because it's whiskey production, to your point earlier, it's not quick. Whiskey, it's not quick. And brands that are beloved and global and iconic aren't built overnight. Like, it takes such a magical formula, I think, of a good product with the right package and the right team behind it and the right story. And then just a lot of discipline, right? Like it's not exactly interesting to tell the same story over and over every day for decades. And that's really kind of what we've done here. It takes a ton of discipline. It's real easy to go make new shiny things all the time, but it's exhausting. So I think for us, it's a couple of things. We've not traditionally done a ton of what I would call line extensions. We've got 3 different proofs of Maker's Mark with Classic, the 101, and Cask. And each one has a different role. Each one has a different occasion. And that's as much of, I guess, as a traditional line extension. But all those products have a real reason to live. And then when you look at Makers 46 and our barrel program and our wood finishing series, to me, those are truly innovative products. Like that was us doing something that no one had done before in the industry. People didn't understand it. Your purists didn't like it. 46, the only reason that product still exists is because the whiskey is so damn good. The name is stupid. The using French oak and how we do it and the stave process and the finishing, like it was just hadn't been done before and people didn't understand it. And honestly, they didn't want to. And it's taken a decade of really reiterating kind of how we do it to your bourbon lovers for them to finally go, okay, I get it. Like and it makes sense. And ultimately it tastes good, which is why it's still here. But I would say when we launched that product in 2010, the bourbon community was not ready for it. I mean, it was, you would not believe the resistance, like people just didn't get it. And so to me though, that's, if you're not pissing people off, you're probably not trying hard enough, right? Like doing things that are fine or meant, like I would rather do something that really angers people or has them passionate one way or another. And so I think for us, at the end of the day, we can only make so much whiskey in a year, and Maker's Mark is always going to be the priority. Right now, everything we make comes out of that one whiskey. It's just, as my mom would say, each whiskey's wearing a different costume, right? So it's different expressions of the same whiskey, but everything comes back to Maker's Mark, and everything we do really falls out of the DNA of Maker's Mark. So it's, if we could build 7 new sets of stills and 100 new warehouses, maybe then we go try to make the next Maker's Mark or the next something else. But the truth is, growth is slow in our industry, and what we're laying down today won't be sold for 6 to 7 years. So it's and your inventory is evaporating. Like there's a lot of things about our industry that are weird if you think about it. So, I think our goal is to build Maker's Mark and find new and delicious whiskeys to keep telling that story in new and different ways to consumers. I mean, that's ultimately what my job is.
Right. I love that you just gave an example of what you were talking about at the beginning, that you guys have to ultimately at the end of the day be able to go to sleep at night, like look yourself in the eye and sleep with that. And it sounds like that's what you did with 46 and just waited until people got it, which is, that takes a lot of bravery as a brand. So I'm definitely impressed by that. And I think the bourbon industry in general, why I love talking to anyone in the bourbon industry about innovation is you guys are the people at the dinner table that if anyone else is complaining about how hard innovation is, you guys always have like the flex of like, yeah, try having a product that won't be done for 7 years and is actively evaporating, and then come back to me when you actually get how hard that is. So it's just wild to me. So I wanted to dig in a little bit. How do ideas kind of bubble up on your team? What does it look like to get feedback? What does kind of infrastructure around innovation or feedback loop look like within Maker's team?
It really is. We take input from commercial and marketing on stuff, but it doesn't start there. All the liquid and the ideas, and it really does come from the distillery team. So our core innovation team is myself, Beth Buckner, who I mentioned is innovation manager from a more technical side, Denny Potter, our master distiller, and then Rob Samuels, who is obviously our chief whiskey officer. I don't even know what his title is, honestly. He runs the whole thing. So the four of us are kind of the core team, and we talk about, where we want to go and flavor levers we want to pull. I think that's really how I think about my job. Is I spend half my time trying to understand where flavor comes from, whether it's agriculture or processes. And then once you understand the levers, then you can go pull to dream up new whiskeys. So we're really building the blueprint for whoever comes after me and who comes after them, right? Like this department will be singing in 20 to 30 years. We're building we're doing kind of the dirty work, I feel like. And it's fun and I love it and I wouldn't have it any other way. But we're really diving into single variables to understand. So as we learn what's possible, it really inspires like, okay, we could make a whiskey that does X, Y, Z. How does that fit in the portfolio? Who would drink this? What's the story we tell? And then it's working on, what's the right volume? How do you go to market with it? How do we this is the thing too. The marketers are going to push the creativity and how it's going to go, but a salesperson has to go sell it. So I think one of the big learnings with 46, because we screwed it up in a lot of different ways, we were too precious about the store, like making sure people understood technically how it was made. People don't give a shit. that's there if they want to peel back the onion and go dive deeper. But the average consumer only cares about how much does it cost? Does it taste good? And as a brand, does it say something about me as a person? And I think that whole product, we learned a lot about not being too precious on your own stuff. So as a team, it's really balancing all these things together. And I would say a lot of times experimentation, I would say 95% of the things we experiment on end up on the editing floor. So one of our things is like, is this product worthy of Maker's? Like, we think Maker's Mark is the greatest brand, the greatest bourbon. Like, that is a belief that is entrenched in all of us. So when we innovate, is this product worthy of being in this Maker's Mark portfolio? So there's a little, I don't know if I answered your question, but there's a little bit of taking inputs, but there's a core 4 of us that really set the direction and where we're going to go and the stories we're going to tell and how those liquids are going to show up and then how those liquids sit together, right? You don't want a bunch of whiskeys that do the same thing. So they need to complement one another, but be different enough to have their own reason to exist.
You used the word occasion earlier. This is kind of a side question. In my mind, that's such an elegant way of talking about bourbon, like how someone's going to use it in a different occasion. Is that how you're using that word?
It is. We think a lot about the occasion, right? Like when I'm out drinking at a bar and it's loud and noisy and crowded, that's a different drinking occasion than if I'm sitting at home having a nightcap. Or if I'm, you're celebrating versus maybe you're commiserating. Like there's different occasions, different reasons. And for me, whiskey can fill all those occasions. It's just the serve, the actual whiskey itself. Like whiskey's usually a part of my everyday life. It's just going to change depending on the occasion of what we're doing, right? Tailgating, I don't often drink early times out of a flask, but when I'm at a football game, that makes total sense to me.
Right.
Right.
Right. Yeah. On the hill, I don't know that I'm, that's my go-to. So, one other thing I wanted to ask about, I know you had mentioned earlier, you have this sort of team of brand ambassadors. Do you want to kind of revisit that or what that team looks like and what their function is?
Yeah. So this brand was built, Bill Jr., you've got the founders, Margie and Bill Samuels, their son joined the business. And most people, when they think of makers in Kentucky, they often think of Bill Samuels Jr. He was the guardian of makers and for 40 years. And really, when you look at the early success and how the brand was established and built and its personality, it was all him. He did all of that. And so when he started, his dad didn't believe in traditional marketing. In fact, he didn't like marketers or agency people at all. He didn't believe in advertising. So when Bill Jr. joined the business, his job was to find customers, but his dad had all these rules. And so what he would do is he would go to bars and restaurants in Lexington and Louisville, and he would buy people drinks as they came up to the bar. And it's hard to imagine, but even Kentuckians didn't drink a lot of bourbon necessarily back then. And, we had some really key first customers. Keeneland was our very first customer. And so he built the brand one drink at a time, one person. And his dad had this philosophy that if people like it, they'll tell their friends, right? If they like it, they'll tell their friends. And that's how we'll, but his dad also, this was a hobby, right? This distillery, he made a bourbon very geared to his own palate. And his whole ambition was, maybe some of the best restaurants in Lexington and Louisville will carry it, and my friends will like to drink it at my house. What a great business plan. So, so that was how the brand was built, was Bill Jr. doing, this really grassroots marketing. And it was a core part of the brand's DNA, humans, talking to humans, right? And so we have kept that. That was my first job. I was our global brand ambassador. And so even at the size we are now, we have a huge, not huge, we have a small army of individual men and women that is their job, is still very much grassroots in the community, making the brand a part of different communities. And it's not just working with bars and restaurants. It's touching consumers. It's really owning the brand when you live in a place. I got to do it in London. And I worked, it's interesting. I started as our global ambassador. Then I went to our European, and then I was the UK, which seems like I kept getting demoted, but it wasn't. The idea was, let's go deep versus wide, and let's really be a part of the community and let the brand touch a lot of different, people, not just bartenders, not just liquor store owners, not just consumers, but everybody. So yeah, before I came to Full-Time Innovation, I was building this team globally. I think we've got about 40 people on the team now. I do not manage them anymore. We have someone much better qualified to do that job. But they're an incredible team, and they really input innovation from the outside in. So I have we put them into smaller little task force, I guess. So once a month, I have a call with a group of 5 of them where we just hear what's going on in the market. Because I'm in Loretto, Kentucky. What do I know about what's happening in Singapore or Tokyo I don't know anything. So they're inputting, and we actually hear from them a lot about trends they're seeing, what's happening, how things, what's resonating. And it's not just products. It can be cocktail trends. It can be, marketing things. It can be, you mentioned seltzer, right? Like, is that actually a thing, or is it already dying? Like, they have their hand on the pulse much better than we do down here. So they're an incredible team.
And you beat me to the punch, but it sounds like they are such an incredible asset. You guys are, like you said, limited to Kentucky and a big, powerful brand. And I think it's so easy to get further and further away from the customer almost as you get caught up in maintaining a company. But it sounds like you guys are very much keeping your pulse through this team on what both individuals want, what the market wants, and sort of a constant feedback direct from the customer, which is so essential to knowing what's next. So that sounds like such an incredible asset. And honestly, anytime you need an ambassador to the UK, you know, have my number. So let me know. Singapore, I don't really care. I will happy to travel anywhere. Just don't tell my husband. So a little bit of a different question, but still in this realm. What would you say is y'all's disposition toward risk? I know it's kind of a broad question, but risk is something that sort of goes hand in hand often with growth, creativity, and innovation.
And it's also something that becomes a much bigger focus as you get big, right? When you're small and you're an underdog and you're scrappy, risk doesn't feel. And we were always a brand that took risk. I think it's been interesting. I can't speak in totality for the brand. But I would say, traditionally we were a brand that took risk. I think we got to a certain size and probably were not afraid to try new things, but we'd been doing this one thing for so long. Like, why would we do anything else? What if it was the wrong move? And then I'll tell you, for me, a big moment for the brand, and I don't know, Rob and Bill probably feel differently because they probably have PTSD from it, but was when we lowered the proof. I don't know if you remember that. In 2013, we added an ounce of water to every bottle of Maker's Mark because supply was so constrained and shelves were sitting empty for weeks and months at a time. And we weren't going to cut the age. We've never sourced whiskey a day in our lives. Every bottle of Maker's Mark, that whiskey was made here. Everything made here has gone into a bottle of Maker's Mark. We have never bought or sold whiskey in our 67 years. Wow. It's probably the number one thing I'm most proud of as a brand. Nothing wrong with it. I love what it's done for the craft industry and what's happening, but we are a single source of supply. And so we made that decision and we bottled and shipped that product for approximately 6 days, and the world lost their mind. And I'm not just saying people were kind of upset. You talked about that consumer. I remember us sitting in a room before we sent the email to our ambassadors and saying, gosh, what if nobody cares? Like, that would be worse. Boy, did they care. And boy, did they let us know. But they also forgave us. Like, we screwed up. It was a bad move on our part. But it also, to me, was a really important business lesson that if you're transparent and you're sincere and you make a mistake, people will forgive you. And so I think that to me was like, oh, you can do some things. You can, right? Like that wasn't, adding that ounce of water didn't feel risky at the time. And hindsight, it really was. And it was, it made us realize like this is a brand that the consumers really have a lot of ownership of. So I think we are not afraid to make mistakes. I think our biggest thing is being really protective of the Maker's Mark brand and doing things that are worthy of that brand. So it's a good balance. I don't know if that was, I don't know if that answered your question.
That's great. And I also think in the age of, I think transparency or vulnerability, both from individuals and brands is almost a little overdone at the moment. And I think it's really important what you said. It's transparency, but it's also sincerity. Like even the way you're talking about it now is like owning a mistake rather than being like, and then we sent this press release to like make everyone happy and sort of apologize. You guys actually meant it and you actually listen to customers and you actually are thankful that they were mad because you know what that means, which is that they care. And I think that's super important. The other thing too that I'm keeping in mind that you sort of help me understand is that your customer isn't just the consumer. It's not just me. It's the distributor, it's the bar in the industry. And then, you guys have a lot of people to make happy.
Yeah, there's a lot of layers in the way alcohol is distributed in the United States of America. But no, yeah, our distributor partners obviously are the first port of call. And then from there, it goes to the trade, which are bars, restaurants, or liquor stores. And then the consumer's kind of the end user. So we have a lot of, and then even your own internal sales team, right? It's, there's a lot of people that touch this brand and there's a lot of people that care about this brand. It's definitely, I think people are pretty passionate about whiskey in general. There's something about it. I always think it's the maturation, obviously, because that's my job. But I think the folklore, the history, the heritage, the fact that it does take so many years, there's something about it that feels more emotive than a bottle of vodka. There's something about whiskey, but this brand in particular, it gets into people's skin. So it's, sometimes it drives you crazy, but I think most of the times we're appreciative of it. And I'll tell you, the pandemic's made us very appreciative because we haven't had the same tourism down here. We typically get 150,000 visitors a year to our distillery.
Wow.
And we didn't have that. And we've really missed the energy of people being around. And, so yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as we kind of round the corner, last question I want to ask about is you've mentioned in our conversations about this sort of entrepreneurial spirit that's within the DNA of Makers. So maybe finish out by telling us a little bit about that heritage or that culture within the team and within the brand.
That's really a Samuel's thing. Bill and Rob are entrepreneurs at the soul of who they are. And they like to hire entrepreneurs. Their whole thing is like, I don't pay you to agree with me. I pay you to actively challenge the world around you. So they hire people who are really experts at what they do and they let them go do it. And so that has been, honestly, we don't have a ton of turnover. Like this is the only real job I've ever had. I started with them when I was 25 years old. And there's a reason, like it suits me. It suits my personality because I'm allowed to go. And that's his number one thing. Bill always says like indecisive is the worst thing you can be. Like just do something. Even if you screw up, just go. So there's really a sense of letting people own their own business, letting people really make decisions and have ownership and freedom. But then you have accountability, right? So if I screw up, it's on me. And you're allowed to make mistakes. You just don't make them twice. So yeah, that's definitely, it's a little bit of anarchy sometimes. Like we're a very flat organization. Like someone brought up succession planning the other day and everybody's like, yeah, I don't know. Like we don't have a lot of layers. There's not a lot of hierarchy here. So there's good and bad with all things, I think. So, but
absolutely.
Yeah, it's great. It's a wonderful place to work.
Sounds like you, I love hearing how much you adore your job. It's obviously very evident, and not just your job, but the brand you work for and your belief in that. Last thing I'll say, we work pretty closely with Gray Inc. or Gray Construction, as people often know it here in Lexington. And one of the things that the Gray family and Stephen Gray is passionate about is building in a founder's mentality into their team. And I think that's what you're describing, of everyone feeling in part like they are a founder, which is hard as you grow. It's probably, that's what makes innovation hard for a big company versus a startup where you've got, a couple people getting it off the ground. So it just sounds like you guys are very much just towing that line well. And, it sounds like hats off to the Samuels family for really making that a priority. So
it's funny you say that, because I would say the question Rob asked me the most, like, I'm not kidding, is he'll say, if you own the brand, what would you do?
I love it.
And it is, but it's a really great question, because you work harder, you're more thoughtful. We like all meetings, if you own the brand, what would you do? And it actually makes your decision making a lot easier if you put that hat on and you think about it from that perspective.
Right. I know Alltech has always put a big, like, that's always their question as well. Like, if you owned it, what would your choice be? So,
which doesn't surprise me, knowing how Pierce Lines
exactly.
was, right? Like,
yeah,
that makes total sense.
I mean, that's one of the biggest legacies I know that they speak on, even that he wanted to leave behind, was that question. So, well, Jane, I really can't thank you enough. This has been an absolute pleasure. I'm very excited for people to hear about this, not just because obviously innovation in bourbon is a specific thing, but I think the lessons you guys have learned, the principles you guys hold to, apply to pretty much any industry. So, thank you so much for your time. Any last words on how you want listeners to get involved, other than, the hard job of just going out and buying your bourbon?
Yeah, I would say just what I love about the bourbon industry, it's so rooted in Kentucky and agriculture, right? And you think about Kentucky as a state, we're an agricultural state. So, I would encourage your listeners to go visit your local distillery. It doesn't have to be us, but just see what the state's all about and see what our industry is all about, because it's pretty remarkable, and how it's so intertwined with Kentucky. So,
amen to that. Well, on that note, Jane, thanks so much, and we will talk to you soon.
Thanks, Liz.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. If you know someone who should be on our show, even if it's you, reach out to us at innovationincubated.com. And while you're on our website, sign up for our newsletter. Lastly, thanks to our sponsor, Apex Software. The right software partner can change everything. So reach out today at apexsoftware.com. Until next time, go team.